Hi. I took the liberty of changing the title because I'm not sure how many good ideas I've actually ever had. And if I look back over my life, particularly my life, but also my career, it seems like they were a string of things that seemed a good idea at the time. A bit like this guy. I'm sure at the time this seemed like a good idea. And then they said it was 12 minutes. And I thought, well, I'm not sure that I've made anything last for 12 minutes, let alone an idea. And Mark Twain says, there aren't any new ideas anyway. It's just a building idea on idea. So don't look to me today for anything particularly new, because most of the ideas that we may have had anyway, we have probably copied from someone else in the room. So I should say that everything I'm about to say is copyrighted already by Kevin Bartlett. So what's the big, old idea? That's it. Nothing makes sense until we tell a story. Nothing at all. We live somewhere in a universe, probably not at the center, of 100 billion stars. And it stretches back, this universe, into eternity, and it stretches forward into eternity, and the reality is, nothing makes sense. It's a series of meaningless moments. You can tell I used to be a priest. I did. That's a true story. So what's happened over time is that we have tried to make sense of that meaninglessness by overlaying patterns, by telling stories. And we have created these stories in all traditions and in all cultures to make sense of the world around us, to bring meaning to that. The thing is, we're not that good at it sometimes. Things we do don't make that much sense. And I found this because I like finding funny things on the internet. And this was in an article by BuzzFeed, I think, and it was 20 people who should never be allowed to decorate cakes again in their life. The subtitle was, at what point did this cake decorator realize that cap was not cat, or cat was not cat? I'll give you a moment to let that joke sink in. And making sense of stuff is tricky, and I know that as well because I'm a dad. I have twin girls, they're 10 years old. They're not that smart because they follow in their dad's footsteps. So when they were about 6.5, I started collecting some of the things they said, trying to make sense of them and them making sense of life. They don't know I'm telling these stories. I think this is testimony to the learning that goes on in the school. This is the common ground curriculum in action. I love the fact that I work in an international school, but this is one of my favorites. So there we are. We're making sense of life, and we're telling stories. And there's a guy called Jason Silver who explains that in words that are better than mine. So let's listen to him.
We talk a lot about the power of story, as a tool and technique for transformation, for interpersonal persuasion, to feel upgraded, to experience catharsis. How does it work, right? Like when it works, it's such a powerful thing. I think stories are a kind of cognitive technology. They literally colonize the brain They literally take over. They pattern our ability to discern the sense impressions as they come in. They are a deciphering mechanism to extract meaningful patterns out of our lives. And so stories are so powerful, so important is this tool, this meta pattern, that it plays out again and again and again in every single variation and variable. Joseph Campbell talks about the hero with 1,000 faces. It's always the same hero because it's always teaching us the same lesson. It's always providing a map to turn every experience into a meaningful experience. I almost feel that human beings are embedded in their stories. The human race, who we are, is a story. We are a narrative. Mind is narrative. Consciousness is a self-reflecting awareness of pattern, of story. And so I think it's innate. We wouldn't be us without it. It's a powerful thing. It's a cathartic thing. It's an important thing. And it's a thing worth celebrating, worth framing, and worth, talking about, distilling, dissecting, exploring. Stories.
Stories, a deciphering mechanism to extract meaningful patterns. I think if we're an educator, we know that's what kids are doing all the time. We know that's why we read them bedtime stories. That's why we go to the cinema, to make sense of our lives. So here's my question. What's the story of your school? How do we help people make sense of the learning that is taking place in your schools? How do we narrate that experience? How do we join the dots so that people can make sense of this stuff? How do we explain to parents who are visiting our schools how to choose one school against another? People find it hard to join the dots sometimes because we're not giving them the lexicon, the language. We're not narrating things for them, and we're not giving them the patterns that will help them understand what learning looks like in our schools. And we're not giving them that big picture so that they can make sense of something that is fragmented and meaningless and ultimately could look beautiful if they only had the eyes to see. The problem is, it seems to me, that we work in a world where we love cliches. 21st century education, educating the whole child. And I think some parents hear that phrase when we tell that narrative and they think, what? You mean there are some schools where they just educate the foot? But we keep on speaking in cliches. We don't differentiate our narrative so people can't choose one school against another. This is a picture of 5 international schools in Europe on the same day, their homepages. And we wonder why families find it difficult to make the choice between different kinds of schools. So some of the work that Kevin and I and others in the school community in Brussels are trying to do is to think, how do we communicate this story in ways that are meaningful, relevant, and give the patterns so they actually can make sense of what learning looks like. So let's have a look at one that takes the science theme.
We wonder how the world works. We observe. Experiment. Collect data. We solve problems, stretching our thinking. We analyze and search for patterns that will help us understand the bigger picture. We are engineers of design, of thought. The possibilities are expanding.
And the more we tell these kinds of stories, the funny thing about stories is the more the story tells us. It narrates our future. We become the story that we are trying to tell. I once wrote an article called "The Man Who Mistook His Website for a School." The basic premise was the fact that those of us who create websites, what we're often doing is describing the school that we are and the school that we want to be. And there's a process there. The more we tell that story, the more we become that story. The more we tell that story, we help other people to find their place in that story. And it demands questions of us. Are these stories coherent? Are they engaging? Are they truthful? And fundamentally, are they founded upon learning? We make mistakes. We don't always get it right. Sometimes the stories we have to tell are challenging. The context in which we are educators are challenging contexts. Sometimes people look at stories and they see something different to the person sitting next to them. But fundamentally, it seems to me that if we're in the business of education, we are in the storytelling business. So I hope that the story of this conference is a good one for you, and it's up to you to decide how it ends. Thank you.